The fragrance of selfless love that has drawn the world into one family. The truth of an eternal message that has been revealed through every act and word. The fulfillment in service that has been taught by relentless sacrifice. The Lord's own life is indeed His message.
Sairam and greetings from Prashanti Nilayam. It is a pleasure to welcome you again. And just to remind you, today we are presenting the 6th episode of our special serial entitled The Message of the Lord. Just in the last episode, I was telling you that whenever we face a moral crisis or wish to talk to God, He speaks to us via a special hotline called the Buddhi. And if this hotline is not in regular use, it can have breakdowns. And this can be a serious problem in times of emergency. It is obvious, therefore, to do regular maintenance of this hotline to keep it in good condition, so that not only can God talk to us whenever He feels it necessary, but also so that we can cry out to the Lord when we are in deep trouble.
Buddhi is thus a vital communication line, and it is in our interest to keep it in good working condition. The question now becomes, how does this hotline to God become dysfunctional? In other words, when and how does it fail? Buddhi fails the same way gadgets and instruments that we normally use fail. For example, if we have a bicycle and we wish to use it anytime we want, then clearly the cycle must be kept clean, the bearings must be regularly oiled, the tire pressure must be constantly checked, air pumped in if required, the brakes must be kept in order, and so on. In the same way, the maintenance procedures that Baba recommends for keeping Buddhi in good working condition are: always avoid bad company, always do your best to see good, hear good, and speak good, and finally, try and chant the name of the Lord as frequently as possible.
These things are not all that difficult, are they? Yet, people do not bother. Why? Because they do not understand or appreciate the significance of Buddhi. Here is a simple example of how ignorant people can be of the gifts that God has endowed us with. Now, what is the most precious gift that God gives to each and every one of us? Clearly, it is life itself. And therefore, we ought to take as good care as possible of ourselves, right? Just have a look at these pictures.
Life is supposed to be precious, and yet, look at how careless these people are about safety and the unnecessary risks they are taking. Some say these sorts of things can happen only in the third world. Well, similar things happen even in advanced countries also. For example, car accidents caused by drivers texting while driving is rapidly increasing. In one instance, there was even a train accident that happened because the train driver was so busy sending a text message that he failed to see. In other words, indifference to things important is far too common, and that applies to Buddhi also. Buddhi is so important that this is how Lord Krishna cautioned his chosen disciple Arjuna. The essence of what Krishna said is the following: O man, if you allow your mind to be drawn to objects of the world and develop attachment to them, then step by step desires would build up in you. And when you are not able to fulfill your desires, you are likely to become more and more angry. And when anger is allowed to grow, it would lead to jealousy, hatred, and such other undesirable qualities. In the end, you would lose all your reasoning power, and when that happens, disaster is sure to follow. God has not only given us many gifts, but has actually taken residence within us, which is why Swami often tells us,
తన యందున్నటువంటి ఒక తత్వాన్ని మానవుడు కనుక్కోవాలంటే బయట వెతుకుతున్నాడే కానీ తన లోపల వెతకటం లేదు.
To know the latent divinity within, man is searching outwards, externally.
ఈనాడు ప్రతి మానవుడు కూడాను భగవంతుని వెతకటము బయటనే వెతుకుతున్నాడు కానీ తన యందున్నటువంటి భగవంతుని ఏమాత్రం తాను కనిపించడం లేదు.
Man is in search of God in the outer world. He is not making any search within.
తన యందే ఉంటున్నాడు భగవంతుడు.
God is in you.
తానే భగవంతుడిగా ఉన్నాడు.
You are God.
కానీ తన్ను బయట తట్టు వెతుకుతూ ఉన్నాడు.
But yet man is in search of him outside.
ఒక చిన్న ఉదాహరణ మీరే చూసుకోండి.
A small example.
నీవు ఇక్కడే ఉన్నావు.
You are here.
నీవు బయట తట్టుపోయి నీవు చూడాలనుకుంటే వీలవుతుందా?
Is it possible for you to find yourself outside?
నీవు ఏ విధంగా చూడగలవు?
How can you find yourself?
చూడటమే వీలు కాదు.
It is not possible.
అంత మాత్రం చేత నేను లేననుకుంటావా?
That doesn't mean that you can deny yourself.
అంత వెతుకుతూ పలానా అబ్బాయి ఎక్కడైనా ఉన్నాడా అని అడిగితే నీవేనయ్యా పలానా అబ్బాయివి అని అడుగు చెప్తాడు.
If you go on in search of your own self, some stranger will tell you, you are the person whom after you are searching for.
అప్పుడు తన ఉన్నటువంటి సత్యాన్ని గుర్తించుకోగలడు.
Then you will understand the truth within.
ఈ ఏకత్వాన్ని గురించి తెలుసుకోవటం చాలా సులభమే కానీ దాన్ని నమ్మాలి బాగా.
It is quite simple and easy to know this oneness, but one must have absolute faith.
నేను అనేటువంటిది నాకంటే బయట లేదు.
In fact, I is within, not outside.
నేను నా యందే ఉంటున్నది కానీ నాకంటే బయట లేదు.
The I is within me, not outside.
Actually, as Krishna explains in the Gita, Swami is within us in 3 different ways or levels. To start with, God is present in every single atom in our body as a power of every atom. And remember, there are trillions and trillions of atoms in our body. You might wonder, what does it mean to say that God is present in every atom? Well, as you know, atoms are needed to make molecules. And there are so many different types of molecules in the human body. Without these molecules, we cannot have cells of different types. And without cells of different types, we cannot have flesh, blood, bones, muscles, and so on. Going back to the atom for a moment, when an atom is split, a tremendous amount of energy is released in relation to the size of the atom, that is. Such power is actually present in every single atom, and there are trillions and trillions of atoms within us. Do you know that the energy released by the total conversion of all the atoms in just about 5 grams of uranium was enough to flatten the whole of Hiroshima? Keeping that in mind, just imagine how much of atomic energy must be packed in this person. Fortunately, all this energy is safely packed in and cannot ever be released. So don't worry, none of us are walking atom and hydrogen bombs. So that is level 1 of God's presence within, namely, as a power of every atom in our body. Let us move on now to level 2 of God's presence in us, namely, as a life force or prana shakti, as Swami refers to it. By the way, are you aware that this aspect of God is something we remind ourselves of every single day? You can't remember? Then just watch. Remember that shloka? Isn't that familiar? Where do you think that came from? From the Gita. And Swami has referred to it so many times just to remind us that when we eat, it is God within who does the digesting always. And God does this for every creature, from the ant all the way to the elephant and the whale. That is just one example of how the life force operates and helps us. Let us explore some more of the wonders concerning this mysterious life force within that keeps us going without our even being aware of it. You see how active these people are? That is how active a living body can be. Where does that power come from? From the life force or prana shakti, and that shakti is God. It is not just vigorous activity via which the life force manifests. There are a number of other remarkable things that can be traced back to the life force. Just consider the fingers of a human hand. Have you ever wondered how dexterous they are? Isn't that amazing? That is just one great example of the life force in action. Take a simple thing like opening a bottle. Do you think you can open a bottle without the use of the thumb? If so, try it. Newton was so amazed by the thumb that he once declared, "The thumb alone is enough to prove that God exists." Here are some amazing facts about the human body that we all take so much for granted. Let us start with the heart. We all know that the heart is a pump that is vital for circulating blood, etc. Now, normally a pump set consists of a pump and a motor. If the heart is a pump, then where is its motor? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Are you aware that in the case of the heart, the pump is built into it, that it is based on electrochemistry, and that the difference in the ionic potential of the sodium and potassium atoms in the cells? The heart may be described as a pump, but no man-made pump can grow in size. But the heart? It is a pump that actually grows in size as an individual grows from a baby through childhood to an adult. The heart is also capable of self-repair, to a modest extent, that is. Can any man-made pump repair itself? Another great thing, the heart works literally non-stop from birth to death, which could even be as long as 70, 80 years, and at times as long as 100 years. What about cooling? Pumps normally require cooling. Where has nature hidden the cooling system of this pump within us? Have you ever thought of that? And by the way, do you know that God has different designs for the heart of a giraffe as compared to that of a cow? Do you know why? Here is why. In the case of a giraffe, its head is always at a much higher level than that of the heart. And so, when the heart has to pump blood to the brain, which is one of the important jobs of the heart, in the case of the giraffe, the heart has to work hard because the pumping is against gravity. By contrast, when a cow grazes, its head is below the level of the heart, and sending blood to the brain is a much easier task. So, God has a somewhat different design for the heart of a cow. Let us now go to the third level, where God functions as our conscience. Remember what Swami says about conscience? That is right. God speaks to us from within as the voice of conscience via buddhi. Buddhi is thus the hotline that brings us the voice of God. That is why it is important to keep this line open always. And that is possible only through sadhana, or spiritual practices which are specifically meant to cleanse the mind. Avoiding bad company, seeing only what is good, etc. is what sadhana is really all about.
I have a question. If God is in me, is He in all the other people too?
Of course He is. How can God be partial?
Okay, let me put it this way. There are 6 billion people on this planet Earth. If God is in each and every one of these 6 billion people, do you mean to say that there are 6 billion gods?
చూడండి, బల్బుల్లో ఎక్కడ చూసినా కానీ ఒక దీపం వెలుగుతూ ఉండాలి.
You find bulbs here illuminating.
కానీ బల్బులు వేరువేరుగా ఉంటున్నది, కానీ కరెంటు ఒక్కటే.
You see the many bulbs here, but the current being one.
ఈ కరెంటుకు మూలాధారం ఏమిటి?
What is the basis foundation
అది
for current?
దివ్యమైన శక్తి.
That is the divine power.
అది వైరు ద్వారా వెళ్ళి
It flows through the wire.
మనసు ద్వారా బల్బుగా నిలిచి
And it stands there in the bulb of the mind
ప్రకాశంగా వెలుగుతూ ఉంటుండాలి.
and shines forth as light.
కనుక ఈ అన్ని వెలిగించేటువంటిది, తొలగించేటువంటిది, తిరిగించేటువంటిది సర్వం కూడాను ఆత్మతత్వమే.
Therefore that brightens, that illumines, that revolves is the nature of Atma only.
దీనిని నేను ఎప్పుడప్పుడు చెప్తున్నాను, సత్యము, ధర్మము, శాంతి, ప్రేమ అని.
Bhagavan refers to them as Satya, Dharma, Shanti, Prema.
There is surrounding the planet an atmospheric belt. That air is everywhere, and there is no place it is not. At the same time, there is air in the lung of every person. So you see, air can be everywhere and also in all lungs at the same time. In the same way, God can be everywhere and in all entities and beings. Which is why Swami says most emphatically,
ఏది చూసినా కూడాను వారిని గొప్పవారిగా మనం భావించాలి.
Consider everyone divine and great.
అందరి యందు దైవం ఉన్నాడు.
There is God in everybody.
గాడ్ ఈజ్ ఎవ్రీవేర్.
God is everywhere.
ఆత్మ అందరి యందు ఉన్నది.
Atma dwells in everyone.
ఏకాత్మ సర్వభూతాంతరాత్మ.
There is only one Atma that is present in all of the creatures.
అందరి యందు ఉన్నది ఒకే ఆత్మనే.
The same self-Atma is present in all.
there is only God everywhere and nothing except God. And this is true all the time.
God may be hiding in everything that we see all around us. But my question is, when I see a wild animal, I see a snake, or for that matter, even a bad person, how do I see God in them? In short, you speak of unity in diversity, but how do I see God in this diversity, which is all that I can see?
సత్య ధర్మములు, శాంతి, ప్రేమలతో
With
నీ నిత్య
Satya,
జీవం యాత్ర సాగించు.
carry on your life sojourn with the principles of Satya, Dharma, Shanti, Prema.
ఈ సత్య ధర్మములు మనకు నిలిచినప్పుడే ప్రపంచం కూడా మనకు నిలుస్తుంది.
And when these two are well maintained, the whole world would be safe and secure.
కనుక నీవు ప్రపంచంతో నీవు పోరాటం అక్కర్లేదు.
You don't need to fight with the world.
ప్రపంచం నీకేం అపకారం చేసింది?
And the world has not done any harm.
అపకారం చేయనటువంటి నిరపరాధులను శిక్షించడం గొప్పదా?
Is it anything great in attacking those who have not been guilty?
ప్రత్యక్షంగా నీకు పరోక్షంగా ఉండినటువంటి సత్యధర్మం నీవు పోషిస్తురా.
Therefore the fundamental qualities of Satya Dharma
వాడిని
has to
కాపాడుతురా.
maintain. See that they are preserved.
వారిని కాపాడుతూ వచ్చినప్పుడు అవే నీకు తిరిగి అస్త్రంగా మారి నిన్ను పోషిస్తూ వస్తాయి.
They in turn will protect you.
ఇలాంటి సూక్తులు, ఆధారమైనటువంటి సూక్తులు మీరు నేర్చుకొని పెద్దలకందరికీ బోధించాలి.
These teachings you should learn and share with everybody, elders in society.
ఎలాంటి ఆపద కలిగినప్పటికీ సత్యాన్ని నీవేమాత్రం వదలకు.
At any point of time, in spite of obstacles and
ధర్మాన్ని ఏమీ
difficulties,
వదలకు.
never give up truth and dharma.
ఆ రెండింటినీ మనం ప్రధానంగా గట్టిగా పట్టుకున్నప్పుడు
With all the determination you catch hold of these two,
దైవమే మనం ప్రత్యక్షంగా వచ్చి
God will come to you directly
నిన్ను కాపాడుతూ ఉంటాడు.
and will protect you.
You may say,
All that is okay. I see a snake. How do I deal with it?
the answer is simple. If you do not feel any hatred towards the snake, and also keep telling yourself that God is in the snake, and since God loves all, the snake would not hurt, it would simply go away. You do not believe it? Actually, that exactly is what Swami has often said in his discourses. He says back in olden times, rishis withdrew to the forests to do tapas. In those days, the forests were dense and full of all sorts of wild animals and reptiles. But none of these creatures ever harmed the rishis as they sat in deep meditation. If by chance they came near these rishis, the good vibrations emanating from them would quieten these creatures and they would just go away elsewhere. That is how love radiates and creates a protective shield. Some of you might not be convinced and may wonder whether such things happen in this day and age. Well, in that case, I must tell you about the following incident that was once narrated to students by a person from New York in Swami's presence. This happened many years ago in Brindavan, in the post-bhajan session that Swami used to regularly have with students back in those days. This person used to regularly render service to the helpless and needy by distributing food packets to people living in a famous slum called Harlem. One day, after distributing such packets, this devotee was returning to his apartment by the subway train, carrying with him the surplus packets left over after distribution. It was somewhat late at night, and there were not many passengers in the compartment. And then, when the train stopped in a station, a man with a huge frame and looking rather mean and quite tough got in. As soon as the train began to move, this man opened a switchblade knife and began threatening people and demanding money from the frightened passengers. Sitting in his bench far away, the devotee who was narrating the incident said that seeing this man, he became quite frightened. He then began praying, "Swami, I know you are in every single person, including this man holding a knife and threatening everyone here. When I see him, he no doubt looks evil. However, I am not going to look at his face. Instead, I am going to look into his heart where I know you are seated. And so I appeal to you, Swami, who is seated in his heart, to accept the love that I am now going to offer. Please respond favorably and give me a sign that you have heard my prayer." The tough guy was giving him a mean and questioning look. Taking courage from Swami, the devotee smiled and said to this man, "Sir, can I offer you some sandwiches and chocolate cookies to go along with it? Here is a packet containing them, and please would you be so kind as to accept?" Having said that, the devotee waited anxiously to see what would happen. The man stretched his hand forward, put away the knife, and began to eat the sandwiches and the cookies. A little later, even as he had finished eating, the train slowed down to stop at a station. The huge and menacing-looking man got up and started walking. It was clear that he wanted to get off at the station. Halfway to the door, he stopped, turned back, looked at the devotee who had given him something to eat, actually smiled at him and said, "Thank you." In the Bible, Jesus extols compassion and giving food to the hungry, saying that when the moment came, Lord God would himself say, "I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you took me into your home." God always acknowledges the love shown to him. If you think about it, Jesus is asking man to see God in the person to whom one gives, which is precisely the same thing which Swami asks us to do. Just to remind you, Swami says two things in this context. Firstly, Sarva Jiva Namaskaram, Keshavam Pratigacchati. This means that if you offer salutations to any individual, it is really addressed to the God within the individual. Thus, all salutations offered go ultimately only to God. Swami also adds, Sarva Jiva Tiraskaram Keshavam Pratigachati. This means that if you abuse any individual, you are really abusing the God within the individual. Thus, all abuses go ultimately only to God.
Do we really want that? Think about it. This brings us to the take-home lesson of this episode, which is God resides in every heart. While our actions must necessarily be at the worldly level, they must always be based on love. That's all we have for you in this episode, and I thank you for joining us. Make sure to be with us again tomorrow for the next episode of our serial. All the best till then. Jai Sai Ram.